If there's one thing that has been proven time and time again, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. If you hold on for long enough, there's no 40-year period in the US stock market that has produced a negative return, which is insane when you think about the Black Monday crash in the 80s. There's always a pandemic. And yet somehow, if you own companies that produce good products, it just keeps producing more value.
Welcome to the Military Money Manual podcast, where every episode is all about achieving financial independence in the military faster than before. We believe personal finance shouldn't be boring or intimidating. Building wealth can be simple, and financial freedom is the ultimate financial goal. Now, here's your hosts, Spencer and Jamie.
Hey, podcast listeners, Spencer Reese here from militarymoneymanual.com. Joined by my co-host, Jamie. And today on the show, we've got Erik Baskin. Erik is a CFP, Certified Financial Planner, and a 2018 graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy with an economics degree. Great job, Erik. I've also got an econ degree as well. A former hospital administrator in the Air Force, Erik has now transitioned out of active duty and joined the civilian corps of Air Force veterans like myself. He was also a captain of his D1 hockey team in college. While he was on active duty, he had that entrepreneurial bug that I think a lot of us get who are kind of stifled by the military, the government's inability to innovate or do anything productive. I started my company while I was on active duty, and Erik started his company while on active duty. So he's got Baskin Financial Planning. That's baskinfp.com. You can go check that out, where he helps military service members, military families, and veterans be better with their money. Erik, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Spencer. Thanks for having me on, guys. Had a great time. I think we had our first episode together maybe a year or so ago. I've since started my own podcast, try to be like you guys, try to be cool. So appreciate you guys having me back on.
Yeah, I've checked out your podcast a couple times. I wanted to start off the conversation by talking about your transition to civilian life. So it was something I went through a couple of years ago in 2022 when I left 12 years of active duty service and became a civilian once again. Erik, what are some things that you wish you could go back in time and tell yourself a couple months or a couple years before separating?
Yeah. So for me, I had a pretty easy transition. I already had started a business a couple years before separating. And then we have no kids and didn't move. My wife's still on active duty. So I just kind of start working from home and become a TRICARE Prime beneficiary, which is pretty awesome. Also have healthcare through the VA too. So I think that was the biggest one for me that I didn't know about till I was getting closer to that separation, was the whole VA disability process, the VA claims process, that the fact that there's VA benefits and healthcare out there for you potentially, depending on if you get a rated VA disability. I was lucky enough to sit next to a civilian in my last job that had done 20 years in the military and recently gotten out. And, he was 100% VA disabled. And he kind of gave me the whole rundown of everything that, you need to do to submit a claim and go to your VSO on base and talk to them, show them your health records, and they'll kind of help you prepare everything. So I think that was the biggest one that most people that I talk to that are still on active duty don't really understand, that VA claims process, and then just how beneficial those benefits can be depending on the rating that you have. And then like other little things, like just making sure, your credit cards after you leave, all of us that play these credit card games, making sure you're checking for any fees that might pop up. I haven't seen any on mine, but making sure you're continuing to monitor those benefits. I use the Travel Freely app. You guys had Zach, I forget his name, on not too long ago, but awesome app that I've used to come up with more cards after leaving active duty. But for me also, I would say as a business owner, it's a little unique, just having to create my own structure to my day. I'm here at home alone all day. So some days like I need to go to Starbucks or something, create a little texture to my day. It can get a little stagnant when you're in the military. Since I was at the academy, it's just like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. scheduled. It was like that on active duty as well, even longer than 6 p.m. When I'm working on my business. But now having all day and a blank schedule other than meetings to do what I want, work what I want, work on what I want, just totally different having to structure that.
The last time we had you on the podcast, you were looking forward to your separation, and we talked a little bit about things to do before leaving. When did you start the process to start working towards separation? Is that a 5 years before or 1 month before kind of thing would you recommend to people?
I think it's definitely in between there. I would say it's probably like in the 18 to 24 month range, ideally, really 12 to 24, because there's just some things I think from a planning perspective you want to check off. Obviously, the VA disability process is one. A big one that people don't think about until it's too late is insurance. I think we talked about that on the last podcast, but like I got a 20-year term life insurance policy in place about a year out. Also got a disability policy in place because I'm a business owner now. I have a lot of future income in front of me that's not protected. And the stats say like 1 out of 4 people will be disabled at some point between their working years and 65. So that's an important one I think that people don't really think about. And then just the cash flow planning. Again, a little bit easier for our household as my wife is still on active duty. No kids, we weren't moving, so that was a little bit easier. But some of these families that are, separating, they're moving, they're selling a house, they're buying a house. They've got to deal with these cash influxes. So I think that planning month-to-month cash flow becomes super, super important and is best done very far out.
Disability insurance, I think that's a topic we have not covered on the podcast yet. How'd you find a policy? And you mentioned being a business owner. Is that something the average military family needs to look at, or even someone getting ready to separate? Is that something that is applicable to most people, or only if you're self-employed or relying on your own business income?
It's definitely going to be more applicable to the self-employed. Most people, when they separate, if they go work for, let's just say Amazon or any big employer, a lot of those employers are going to have their own disability plan, short and long-term disability, depending on the employer, that are going to cover you most times. The safest thing to do, though, for anybody would be to get a private personal disability policy. They're very expensive. They're not cheap, not totally unaffordable. Like I'll just share, mine cost me about $1,400 a year. So you can see it's not crazy, but it is somewhat expensive. But when you're a business owner, you have all that income in front of you. You have to protect it. No one else is going to protect that. If I was going to go get a job at Amazon, they'd protect me. But again, the caveat, if you leave that employer, let's say you went through the VA disability process and all these issues were unearthed and you're 100% VA disabled, you've got XYZ, you may not really be insurable from a private disability perspective. So if you're working for a large employer, you may be able to roll under their group disability plan because they can spread that risk out. But like me, when I signed up with Mass Mutual for their disability policy, they have to, insure just me. So they really had to dive into my health records. So that's kind of, I think, why it is advisable to really start thinking about this before you go through that claims process.
Erik, you mentioned structuring your day and setting yourself up. It's something that I had to go through as well as a business owner and not reporting to a 9-to-5 anymore. So can you kind of walk us through, like, what does your ideal day look like, Monday through Friday, or I don't know, maybe you work on the weekends too?
Yeah, no weekend work anymore. Nope. That is reserved for family time now, which is great mentally. I'm a big Cal Newport fan. I have Cal Newport's time block planner here. There's no video to this, but I'm holding it up right now. So I use that every day to time block out my day, hour by hour, exactly what I'm going to be doing for that hour. But I do start at like a macro level. So I've created like a strategic calendar for the year. What days I'm going to be taking off, what days are holidays, family days, whatever it is. And then filling in the rest of the gaps. What days am I going to be meeting with clients? When are my spring review meetings, fall review meetings, down to what am I doing for clients each month? What is that specific area of financial planning that I'm going to review for them? And what week I'm going to do that. So you can see I'm looking, every week, I pull out the macro calendar of, okay, what am I supposed to be doing this week? Then I'll drill down into what does that ideal week look like? And for me, I like Mondays and Fridays to be real flexible. So I can do fun things like have conversations like this. I like to have my client and prospect meetings Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So I can just edit the availability in my calendar to reflect that. I like to have the last hour of my day flexible so I can do that follow-up email. I don't like meetings first thing in the morning, right? So you start to fill in the gaps of the day that way. So I'll pull out my calendar going into the week. I'll fill in any hard meetings that I have. And then with the gaps, it's just projects that I'm working on, or, every week there's always client service, things that come through the email that need to be serviced. So it just fills in that way naturally. But I think the time block planner is key for me, at least. It's worked really well. But starting with that macro view of, hey, what's the 3 things that I need to get done this quarter, this year, that is super important for my business? And how do I use that on the micro daily level?
Nice. I like that, like setting the intention, for the quarter, for the year, and then figuring out, like backing up and then figuring out, okay, what am I going to do day to day? Because I know for myself, and you might have fallen into this trap too. It can be so easy just to, look at the day ahead or the week ahead and be like, okay, what's the closest alligator and like how I'm going to, get that alligator away from my boat. But then the week is over and you're like, I didn't actually like move any closer to my quarterly or annual goals. And like, sure, like the alligators are gone, for this week, but I'm going to get to the end of the year and be like, all I did was get alligators away from my boat. It's I like that intentionality, and I like Cal Newport. I'm a big fan of him as well. I haven't used that time block planner though, so I'm gonna check that out. Get that recommendation.
So Erik, one of the things you talked about was goals. A lot of military families have a goal of having a real estate either empire or at least owning a home one day. How do you frame the conversation if someone's trying to decide, should I be looking at real estate or should I be saving in my TSP or in the stock market?
Really good question. And it comes up a ton, especially in the military veteran community. It comes down, I think, to personal interest and your financial situation. I think you do need some level of stability and like a base level of financial building block, if you will, before you start putting on rental real estate. I don't know that it's the first thing you should be running into, but it does come down to what are you personally interested in. I think you need to consider all the things that come with rental real estate, property taxes, maintenance, HOA fees, all the things, vacancy, getting calls. My Roth IRA it's never called me. It hasn't called me yet. I don't think it will. But yeah, you just have to consider all that. Some people, I can think of a couple clients that they're so into the real estate, they attend the conferences. That is their thing. And like for them, that is it. Their head is in it. They'll look through 100, 200 deals before they find one that they'll invest in. Like those are real estate investors. I think there's the people that go about it, the other way where they kind of just happenstance. Oh, we're moving and I guess we'll keep it because that's kind of what we do and we'll rent it out. But even though the math shows we're not really cash flowing anything, I think that's where you kind of get into trouble. And especially with high interest rates right now, your risk goes up quite a bit. So real estate returns vary wildly. One rental real estate property on one street in America over 30 years, it could return anywhere from negative to positive 20%, right? It could be all over the place. Consistent disciplined investment in US and global markets over 40 years is going to return probably somewhere between like 8 and 12%. So I think your dispersion of returns is much greater in real estate, which could be great for those who know what they're doing. Really bad for those who don't.
Erik, what about the recent settlement between the National Association of Realtors and I think it was the U.S. government that they settled with? But we might see commissions come down. Whereas historically it's been kind of that 5 to 6%, and for the lower end properties it's just been a flat like 6%. There's really been no room to negotiate. And there's been some companies out there like Redfin and others that have tried to come in and shake up that market. But it sounds like now that we might have a little bit more wiggle room in terms of the commissions that buyers and sellers would have to pay their realtors. Do you think that's going to really shake up the market, or is that kind of just like a rounding error when you're talking about multi $100,000 properties?
I don't know. I think it depends on the market. I definitely can't predict what it's going to do to housing prices. I can't imagine it's going to make housing prices go up. Could it not affect housing prices and they stay relatively the same? Sure. But I have to imagine it's different in different markets. In LA, if you watch like Selling Sunset, if you want to buy a $25 million house in the OC, you need to have a premium realtor that knows that market, that is in it every day. They're probably going to charge a premium price. Whereas if you're buying a house on some street in Dayton, Ohio, that's where I live, maybe that realtor can't demand that premium 3%. You're really going to have to be an educated buyer to be able to talk to your agent, shop around agents, and know exactly like how much agent you need, if that makes sense. Like, hey, this is a spec home. It's new construction. We pretty much just picked it out and show up to the closing, like no big deal. Or like, we need a realtor that really knows this market. We've never been here before. You're going to need to pay for real advice when you need it. And when you don't need it, you're going to be able to go without an agent or maybe pay somebody a flat fee. So I don't know. It's going to be really interesting when mid-July hits. One thing for military families that's interesting is like the VA loan currently doesn't allow for you to pay for realtor fees with the VA loan, right? So if I buy a conventional loan, let's just say in mid-July on a conventional, I can roll that 3%. If I'm paying my buyer's agent 3%, I can roll that into the loan. You currently can't do that with a VA loan. That might be changed before July hits, but that's a real interesting one that could really be a downside for VA home buyers.
You're pretty active on LinkedIn, Erik. And one thing that I've noticed on a lot of the different social media channels, especially TikTok, Instagram, is what is old is new again in terms of these life insurance salespeople out there. I was showing this to my dad, and he was like, "Oh yeah, like we were getting pitched this back in the '80s. Like none of this stuff is new, but all that's new is that they have a new crop of salespeople that are using some new terms, and they have a new crop of victims, basically." But talk to us a little bit about what you've seen in your practice with index universal life insurance, or you might hear people refer to infinite banking, building generational wealth, be your own bank yourself. Any of those kind of terms where people claim to have the unlock the secrets of Rockefeller wealth.
Yeah, absolutely. Once in a while, I see the posts come up with the IUL agents posting, and if you click on their profile, it's always like insurance agent that just started like 1 month ago. I swear, every single time. Every time it's these pop-up overnight IUL agents. I've run into it a few times just in my work. I had a prospect that was paying $700 a month in IUL premiums to her spouse's father. Was the agent. So it was kind of this family deal. And they were considering putting more into the IUL policy. And I was like, well, I don't know how I fit in here. And needless to say, I didn't get hired. But it is wild what's out there right now. And I think you just have to think about like where you're getting your information. And this goes for anything like what, news sources that you're getting it from. TikTok, these claims that they make, these IUL agents, it's to gain your attention. And it's this quick like dopamine rush. Whereas like real good information, like, hey, just invest for a really, really long time, like 40 years, and don't look at your account and you're probably going to be like a multimillionaire. Like that's the kind of thing that doesn't get those kind of views and that clickbait, if you will. So I'm baffled at how much of this that I still see and hear from folks that I talk to and some of the questions I get. I think we as an industry have like just so much work to do still. It's coming a long way, but still a long way to go.
Jeremy Schneider from Personal Finance Club and also the new Nectarine service at hellonectarine.com. We just had him on one of our recent episodes. And he actually signed up for an IUL to see how bad it was and then canceled it to see how painful it was to cancel it.
Oh boy.
He did the math. So he signed up. It was $200 a month to invest in this index universal life insurance policy. And at the end of 40 years, if he had stuck with it for $200 a month, he would have had a value of his investment of $320,000. If he had invested that same amount of money, $200 a month, into a low-cost S&P 500 or total stock market index fund, he estimated, based on historical returns, $1.8 million. And it's crazy because it's only $200 a month. You think like, how could that possibly grow to almost $2 million? But that's the power of compounding. And to lose $1.5 million of that to fees to the person who sold you that index universal life insurance policy, that IUL policy, it's just insane. Like, it also shows why people are so motivated to sell you these types of policies because, hey, over 40 years, it's a $1.5 million payout for them. Plus, there's probably commissions that they're getting from the person who's actually underwriting the policy. So you can see that the incentives are super unaligned. And I always like to say, Vanguard doesn't run sexy TikTok commercials, right? Fidelity, Schwab. I mean, there's a couple influencers out there that, are really pumping index funds. But in general, index funds are boring. There's no incentive to create these buzzwords about like infinite banking and building generational wealth because there's no commission, there's no sales, there's no reason why people need to be pushing these products. And so I always think like the quieter and the harder it is to like learn about something, that's probably it's not like that's hard to learn about. I mean, like we're on this podcast, you're on your podcast, like the entire certified financial planning industry would be very happy if, 80% of people probably just switched all their investments to index funds. And that gets to a deeper question that I've been reading a little bit about recently. And I don't know if you have any expertise on this, but have you looked at any of like the arguments that like index funds are breaking the market? Have you seen anything about that recently?
Yeah, I've seen the news stories talking about clickbait. I don't think I've clicked on those ones. But to your point, I think if you look at the numbers, people that are pure indexers are still so small compared to all those out there that are still trying to pick stocks and put in this and that. So when I see kind of all this crazy stuff out there and like crypto and all these things that are going on right now, I don't know. I almost just become more and more comfortable knowing that I'm doing the right thing, and then that I know it's going to be successful because I know there's so many people out there not doing this. That doesn't really make sense to me that, if index funds are potentially, I think some of the arguments are they're taking over companies, kind of like Vanguard, S&P 500 is like the number 2 shareholder of XYZ company, and that causes proxy vote issues. Like there's all kinds of arguments there. I just find it hard to believe that if every person in America was invested in VTSAX, I find it hard to believe like things would go poorly. I think we'd be investing in broad, diversified companies, and the markets would do their thing. It's hard to believe that would be a bad thing.
I think it goes back to your point about finding good advice, whether it's TikTok or even like just because Spencer and I or you have a podcast doesn't mean that you should just blindly listen to someone that has a nice sounding microphone. Like you have to do the research to back test this data. And speaking of TikTok advice, one of the ones that Erik and I were texting with a few weeks ago is like, no one should ever invest more than 5% in your TSP. Do 5% and get the match and then go buy a whole life policy instead. And it's like, whoa. Like, what do you mean no one should ever invest more than 5%? And unfortunately, like people like that have tens of thousands of followers and hundreds of thousands of people sometimes see that advice. And then there's, seasonal strategies for your TSP where they're like, hey, it's worked well for me for the last 4 years. I'm like, okay, cool. What about the strategy that's worked really well for the last 120 years of the entire stock market? So you have to do a little bit of research. Don't just accept it blindly.
Yeah, I'll put an anecdote in here. I don't know if I said this last time I was on your podcast. It's one of my favorite stories, and I don't even know the details that well. But they did a study at Schwab, I think it was, one of the big custodians. And they studied like every account since 1960. And they found that the accounts that performed the best over like a 60-year time period, whatever that was the ones where the owner forgot they had the account. They didn't log in for decades. It was just like forgotten money. Like it was in some account. So it just shows you like how poor we are at interpreting information as an aggregate and making good investment decisions upon that information. If you just forgot about your account, you're going to perform probably better than the average person.
It's like the investors that had literally died outperformed the average.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's, there's a Warren Buffett quote and something to the effect of, most people say like, don't just stand there, do something. But Warren Buffett used to say like, don't just do something, just stand there, right? Like so many times in investing, the optimal solution is just don't do anything. And I think like the most recent example of this was the 2020 March COVID crash, where like I literally watched a decade of gains disappear in 15 days and then go negative. Like I've never seen a negative section to, my Vanguard performance chart. It was my first time I had lost 6 figures, quote unquote lost, or I had a negative return of 6 figures in the stock market.
Oh gosh.
It was a scary time, right? But my wife and I just kind of looked at each other and we're like, it's okay. We both still got jobs. This is a buying opportunity. And let's just hang on, because like we're not going to be able to time the bottom, because as soon as we think like, this is the bottom, it's probably going to drop further and we're not going to be able to time the top. So let's just hang on for the ride. And we did. And, it recovered within a couple months. And then it went on. Right now, we're right at the beginning of another bull run that's been going on for almost a year and a half now, since 2022. So I think the point there just is, even if you're very well informed, even if you're studying and reading articles and everything, it's so hard to call the bottom. It's so hard to call the top. And if there's one thing that has been proven time and time again, and it's insane that like we have these same conversations over and over again, but like this time is not different. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And if we've noticed one thing about the US stock market performance, if you hold on for long enough, and I think there's no 40-year period in the US stock market that has produced a negative return, which is insane when you think about what happens in a 40-year period in the US stock market with the Great Depression, with the Black Monday crash in the 80s, World War II, Vietnam War, wars in Iraq, wars in Afghanistan. There's always a war. There's always an economic calamity. There's always an oil embargo. There's always a pandemic. And yet somehow it doesn't matter. Like if you own companies that produce good products and have good employees and good customers, it just kind of keeps marching on and producing more value.
Yeah, just a personal story on that same March 2020 crash. I can remember exactly where I was on two separate occasions that week, like March 11th and 13th or something, and hitting the buy button on $10,000 of I forget the exact security, but I think it was like a small cap Vanguard index. And to your point, it was a good buy because the market was down like 10% that day. But then the next day, I think the market was up 10. It was like one of those days where it was like down 10 on one and up 10 the next. So there was like instant regret. Oh, I didn't time the bottom. And it's impossible to do it. But to your point, we have to keep having these conversations, and to hold a portfolio for 40, 50, 60 years, it's not easy. You say it like it's easy, but it's not. You have to continually read, educate, remind yourself why you're holding this portfolio, why being invested for the long term is a good thing. Listening to people like my favorite is Morgan Housel, probably my favorite author, personal finance author. Him and Carl Richards are so like listening to guys like them and what they say about investor behavior.
Just a quick note from one of our sponsors, and we'll be right back to the show. Don't know an IRA from a TSP or an SCRA from a CZTE? Fear not, the Military Money Manual, a practical guide to financial freedom, is here to help. In this concise, no-nonsense guide, our very own Spencer Reese, founder of the popular personal finance site, militarymoneymanual.com, offers invaluable tips and tricks to help service members of all ranks, branches, and bank account levels gain financial independence. Along with laying out the fundamentals of building wealth while serving, the book explains how to take maximum advantage of the unique financial perks available only to service members, whether active duty or reserve, officer, or enlisted. These benefits include special tax-deferred savings plans, preferential bank loans, fee waivers on high-end credit cards, and much, much more. Personal finance is not boring or intimidating. With its candid and accessible tone, this book feels like having a beer with a good and financial savvy friend. So pull up a chair, get comfortable, and learn how to make your military money work for you with the Military Money Manual, a practical guide to financial freedom by Spencer Reese.
The Military Money Manual is available on Amazon, Audible, and my website in hardcover, paperback, ebook, Kindle, and audiobook. Podcast listeners are eligible for a special discount by using promo code PODCAST when they purchase the Military Money Manual on shop.militarymoneymanual.com.
Erik, back in February, you had a podcast episode that I really enjoyed about why you should want to invest at all-time highs. And so someone might be completely baffled by this of why on earth would I invest right now when the stock market's up? Don't I want to wait for it to come down? Could you just give maybe a little recap or try to explain that in a couple of minutes of why it's good to invest even if the market's at continuous all-time highs right now in March of 2024 when we're recording this?
Yeah, it's just crazy. It's so counterintuitive. When you step back and think about it in like the macro view of the US stock market of 120 years, for some of those bull market runs, think about how many new intraday or how many new daily highs that stock market has to hit to continue on that uptick. Like some of these bull runs, it's going to have 70, 80 brand new highs. Like it's totally normal. That's kind of the why behind all-time highs in the math and why that actually works out. But I put some of the math. It's a really good article. I forget who wrote it. JP Morgan, another one from Dimensional Fund Advisors, who's a mutual fund company. But just the data on like, hey, if we invested at all-time highs versus any time over 1, 5, and 10-year periods, I mean, the returns were the same or better at all-time highs. So absolutely, it's just crazy. It doesn't make any sense. You'd think like, oh, if I just bought at the bottom of the market or at the middle of the market, like I would be better off. But it's just wild buying at all-time highs that beget more all-time highs. Think about this year. I think the S&P 500 is up 10.7%, best first quarter since 2019. at the beginning of this year, everyone is probably like, oh, the market's overvalued. It's not going anywhere. We're going to have a bad 2024. So it's just, there's no rhyme or reason in the short term. Doesn't make sense. So just continuing to invest regardless of those new all-time highs is the most prudent thing to do.
Yeah, there's a great book, Just Keep Buying.
Yes, Nick Majuli.
Yeah, there you go. And like, what a great title. And it's something that like I always arguing with my dad about, because he's one of those guys that's like, ooh, market's up 20%, not a good time to buy. And I'm like, my brother makes fun of us because I pull out the chart and I show him like what would have happened if you had bought previous all-time highs, and then he pulls out the chart that show the perma bear chart that shows like we're headed for the Great Depression again. It just goes back and forth, but it really does almost feel like a rigged game, that it doesn't matter if you're buying low. It doesn't matter if you're buying in the middle of the market. It doesn't matter if you're buying at the top of the market, as long as you keep buying and you keep buying. Because that's the thing, right? Is no one's investing $1 million when they're 20 years old. People are investing $200 a month here, $500 a month there, and they're doing it over their entire career usually, which in the military might be just a 20-year career, but for most people, it might be a 40-year career. And when you do that, sometimes you're buying at the all-time high, sometimes you're buying at the all-time low. And it doesn't matter, because in the aggregate, it's just dollar cost averaging, and you're going to end up doing okay along the way. And I think it is crazy to me that that's the way the system works, that like if you didn't even know what the price was of the stock market, and someone just told you, yeah, just put your money in here and don't check it for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, but it's going to be okay. It's crazy. It's crazy that you don't have to actually care what the price is. And as long as you keep buying, you're going to be okay.
One of the fears of when to invest is oftentimes that timing. And another issue is just, I don't know how much cash I should have. And especially right now with high yield savings accounts being relatively high interest, 4.5%, 5.5%. Sometimes when we talk about prepping for PCS, we say to stockpile a bunch of money in case you have expenses.
Yeah.
So let's say there's a military family on the other side of the PCS, or maybe they just got a little bit of a windfall, continuation pay or some kind of bonus. They have a little bit of cash piled up. They see the news. Maybe I should just put it in a high yield savings account. Like, what do we think through in a situation like that?
Yeah, such a good question. And it comes up very often, just in casual conversations with friends, but also clients these days, because rates are 5%. God, I can remember when high yield savings was like 0.75 when I was back at the academy, and I was excited about a 0.75 return. So this is crazy. But no, if the data, as hard as it is to swallow, the data is going to tell you to invest that money. If you want,
like today, not like wait for the news to hit for, yeah.
No, do it today. And this is what I say to clients. I say, if you're asking me, my professional advice is invest that money today. If you don't want to do that, we can invest that in chunks over 12 months. Just know that we are now dollar cost averaging over 12 months as a behavior mitigation strategy, because you're scared of investing now. And just know that the data tells us investing now is the best thing to do. And so sometimes they'll be like, okay, well, let's just chunk it in. And then other times we set up a consistent recurring automatic contribution for 12 months or 6 months or whatever it is. So I think right now investors can be tempted maybe by these 5% high yield savings accounts. They're safe. They're FDIC insured. You think, oh, a 5% return is really good right now because the markets could crash tomorrow. But you just have to remember a few things. One, what we've talked about, all-time highs beget more all-time highs. So a 10% return in one quarter in the S&P 500, your your whatever that is, 1.5% return in your high yield savings that you got over that time doesn't really measure up. And then you also have to remember taxes. So some of us are in relatively high tax brackets with federal and state. So that 5% return is also pre-tax. So really post-tax, that is something like 3.5 or 4, whatever it may be for your situation.
So Erik, what about someone who's financially independent or retired and they want to like hold a couple of years of expenses in cash? Is there a place there for them to use a money market fund or like the Vanguard Cash Plus account, which I think is paying like 4.7% right now? But a lot of these high yield savings accounts are 4% or higher, and the money market funds are 5% or higher. Is there a place like if someone comes to you and they're like, hey, I need like a year or two of expenses in cash to sleep well at night, can you justify that when you're building a portfolio for them?
Sure. And for especially for maybe a retiree, that's actually not a bad strategy. If maybe we have some pension income, we're going to be pretty aggressive with their portfolio and mostly are all stocks. And then having maybe 2 years of cash is actually not a bad portfolio right there. But having that in a high yield savings account right now they're paying just as good of rates almost as the money markets. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a couple of years of cash, maybe in that situation, just in that account, paying 5% so you can sleep well at night. I think you almost need to think bigger about that. What that also does for you is now that when the market tanks, let's just say it tanks 30% in October of this year, you're going to sleep great. You've got 2 years of cash in a high yield savings account. It allows you to be a better investor and a more patient investor, which is super great, especially in that FI or those retirement years.
Yeah, I love that idea of creating a cash buffer that basically just lets you sleep at night, because you know that if we do see those big market downturns, but if you're still investing, if you're still producing income, if you're still working, then maybe you say, look, I'd be comfortable going down from a 2-year cash buffer to a 1-year cash buffer, and the market just went down 30%. Knowing that the market could continue to go down another 30%, you might put some money in there and say, okay, I'm happy with that. And maybe over the next year, I'm going to rebuild my cash buffer instead of investing. But for a retiree, it might make sense. For someone who's still in active duty, who's still producing income, I know when I was active duty, man, I wanted to get every dollar I could to work, and my emergency fund was thin. It was $10,000, and that was the only cash I had because I wanted to get every dollar I could to work in either the TSP, my Roth IRA, or my taxable brokerage account. Different phases of life there, right? The advice that you would give to a retiree is going to be completely different to the advice you're going to give a 22-year-old, first lieutenant who's, fresh out of ROTC or the academy. So yeah, I think cash can definitely play an important role in everyone's portfolio. And I think with the way rates are right now, it's exciting. I had a couple of people reach out to me on Instagram and they're like, hey, can I take the USAA Career Star loan or the Navy Federal Kickstarter loan and put into a CD? I'm like, yeah, you absolutely can. And it's exactly what I did in 2008, because back then rates were 5%. And then, guess what? 2008 crash happened. And in March of 2009, I was like, hey, Grandpa, do you think this is a good time to buy into the stock market? He's like, this is a great time to buy in the stock market. It's, 40% on sale. So I got lucky there, but hopefully we don't have another, 2008 style crash in the next couple of years. But yeah, if you're out there and you've got that opportunity, you don't need the cadet loan at the military academy. They call it the CAL loan. If you don't need that for, other expenses, or maybe you needed, you can take it out in your, I think junior year, your second to last year of school. Yep. Maybe you just put it into a 1-2 year CD, and then you can get that money back out, when you get onto active duty. That can be a great way to do it.
Well, I think there's a couple of things on that. I also did some irresponsible trading with picking some stocks, and it was 2016 bull market, and I made 20 grand. Totally wouldn't do that again, but it did work out. But the other thing I think that you could do, and kind of what I did and what I've talked to some folks about doing, is take that thing out, put it in a high yield savings account, whatever it is, and then let's start maxing your TSP on day one as a second lieutenant. And if you need extra money, you take it, you've got 36 grand sitting there. So, you're essentially washing your paycheck through. You can't take 36 grand, put it in your TSP. That's not allowed. But what we can do is kind of wash that through your paycheck or through your personal expenses and put max into your TSP from your paycheck, supplement with the loan. So it's just another way to think about it, because most second lieutenants are not going to be able to typically max without that buffer.
Right. Yeah. I like that. I like that strategy. I actually get questions about that sometimes too, where they're like, can I just take the loan out and live on that, max my TSP for the first year? It's like, yeah, sure. Go for it. If you're that smart. I was not that smart when I was a lieutenant.
Or now, still.
Or yeah, still now. I also had $100,000 of student loans I had to pay off. So I had other priorities.
Erik, thanks for coming back on the show today. It's always great to have you and your experience, and congratulations on having a successful small business now as a veteran. Your podcast, your services, that people can find you at baskinfp.com, the Bluff Finance podcast. Can you just give a quick summary of what you do, where people can find you, and how they might want to connect with you to see if you're a good fit for each other?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, you can find me at baskinfp.com. It's a website, a couple social media profiles on LinkedIn and Instagram, mostly on LinkedIn these days. My services just offer mostly ongoing financial planning, investment management for military veterans and business owners. If you have a question or want to chat, happy to talk and see if there's a fit. Also happy to help just give you some pointers and point you in the right direction.
And you do offer a initial checkup, right? If people are curious if you're a good fit. So it's not a big commitment right up front.
No, absolutely. Just like to get on, chat, see what's going on, see what you're looking for. And if that's something I provide, awesome. If it's not, would love to point you in the right direction.
Awesome. I learned a lot today. A lot of good conversations about your transition for military to civilian, talking about credit cards and your veteran service organizations and how you're structuring your day now as a small business owner, the real estate and stock market debate, in index universal life and whole life policies and what to do with cash and why we should keep investing for the long run. So lots of good advice there. I appreciate all your insight. If you do have questions about the show, you can reach out to us listeners at podcast@militarymoneymanual.com or on Instagram @militarymoneymanual. And as always, we appreciate the 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this show.
Thanks for having me, Spencer and Jamie. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Military Money Manual podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we really appreciate it. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
The views and opinions presented here are those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views of the DoD or its components. Reference to any commercial products or services does not constitute DoD endorsement of those products or services.